As we participate in these 16 days of activism for the elimination of all forms of violence against women and girls, I offer a reflection on Romans 16 and verse 7. Greet Andronicus and Junia, my relatives who were in prison with me. They are prominent among the apostles, and they were in Christ before I was. There are competing views about women's roles and their contributions in the early church. The way those roles in the primary sources are interpreted influences the perception and participation of women in contemporary Caribbean churches. Debate still rages over whether women should fulfill leadership roles that involve the exercise of authority over men and whether they should be allowed full ordination. In some church communions, the question of women in ordained ministry is said to be settled. However, in some of those same bodies, the placement of women poses a problem, as many congregations express a preference for male pastors. New Testament scholar Eldon App points out the pivotal role of Romans 16:7 in deciding what leadership roles women assumed in earliest Christianity. He claims that this text is chief among the several texts that are prominent in the exploration of and debate over the appropriateness of full ordination for women in various Christian communions. Romans 16:7 offers the only place where Paul used the word apostle to describe a woman. Greet Andronicus and Junia. They are prominent among the apostles. Rena Pedersen, referring to the obscurity of Junia in the Christian tradition, posits that finding Junia, the lost apostle, will establish an important precedence for women preaching and teaching in the church, providing what she calls a psychological boost for women of many Christian denominations. Both Epp and Pedersen underscore the significance of Romans 16 and 7 toward a reasonable resolution of the ongoing controversy over the roles of women in contemporary churches. I am proposing that the apostolic role of Junia in early Christianity is paradigmatic for women in the contemporary church. In the typical Greco-Roman style, Paul ends the letter to the church in Rome with greetings to his friends and associates. Among the 28 persons mentioned in his extensive list, 10 are women, including Junia, an apostolic colleague who was imprisoned with him, Paul. Paul's singling out of these women, especially those in active service, is impressive by any standard in a male-dominated society. The identification of the women and their roles, whether defined or not, provides clues that women are actively engaged in the life of the early church. Collectively, the women in Romans 16 challenge our contemporary views of the leadership roles and contribution of women in the early church. However, for Junia to be marked as an apostle is significant. If Junia was an apostle, it suggests that women held leadership roles based on their gifts in first century Christianity and might not have been as restricted as some modern interpreters and exegetes of biblical texts may want us to believe. There is no consensus among interpreters and scholars as to what Paul intended when he used prominent among the apostles. However, it is usually interpreted from either an inclusivist or an exclusivist view. The inclusivist view asserts that Andronicus and Junia are counted among the apostles, among whom they are outstanding or of note. On the other hand, the exclusivist view maintains that they are highly esteemed or well known by the apostles, but not counted among them. The phrase prominent among the apostles has remained a source of controversy regarding the apostolic status of Junior. Scholars have appealed to the patristic writings in their construct of an inclusivist view for Junior. John Chrysostom is the most influential among the earliest writers who offered a pointed and unambiguous statement. To be an apostle is something great, he writes, but to be outstanding among the apostles, just think what a wonderful song of praise that is. They were outstanding on the basis of their works and virtuous actions. Indeed, how great the wisdom of this woman must have been that she was even deemed worthy of the title apostle. End of quote. Among the main proponents of the exclusivist view are Michael Burer and Daniel Wallace. They postulate that prominent among the apostles almost certainly means well known to the apostles. This implies that Paul acknowledged Junior as well known to the apostles, not as outstanding member of the apostolic band. Burer and Wallace also claim that an examination of primary sources supports the exclusivist view. Interestingly, it is the same primary sources that enable scholars to reconstruct Junior, an outstanding woman apostle among the apostolic circle of the ancient world and the early church. The difference in the conclusions drawn by the proponents of the inclusivist and the exclusivist demonstrate how interpreters and exegetes may use authoritative primary sources to construct imagined socio-theological visions of women of the ancient church and influence contemporary views concerning women's role and contributions in church and society. Debate as to whether Junior was an apostle or well known to the apostles is a gendered controversy. Burer and Wallace refer to the controversy as one of the biblical gynecology in Romans 16:7. What informs the difficulty modern interpreters have in accepting Junior as an apostle is their refusal to believe a woman could be an apostle in the ancient world. Even with the overwhelming testimonies of the early church fathers and the literary evidence in primary sources, the contemporary exclusivist view of women in ancient societies and the early church has shaped modern readers' perception. It is instructive and interesting that when the person named Junior was named Junius, and some major interpreters considered the people referred to in Romans 16 and 17 to be Romans 16 verse 17 to be males, commentators had little hesitation in including Andronicus and Junius within the apostolic circles. As such, that viewpoint should remain even when it is realized that the person in question, Junior, is feminine. Modern scholars' departure from the evidence of the early primary sources may be a result of the controversy within biblical texts that speak of women's role and contribution in the early church. Ironically, we meet a woman who is described as an apostle in the New Testament that contains texts that demand women should be silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but to be subordinate. 1 Corinthians 15:34. And let a woman learn in silence with full submission. I permit no woman to teach or to have authority over a woman. She is to keep silent. 1 Timothy 2 verse 11. The extent to which these passages influence those who oppose Junior's apostolic status may need further exploration. What may be worth noting is that 1 Corinthians 14:34 is considered to be a non-Pauline interpolation, and therefore exegetes and interpreters need to be mindful of this reality. Also, the pastoral epistles in which 1 Timothy falls is a pseudo-Pauline literature. On the other hand, Pauline corpus, like 1 Corinthians 11:5 says, any woman who prays or prophesies with her head unveiled disgraces her head, presupposes that women were engaging in inspired speech in the early church. Like their male counterparts, they performed leadership roles. If prophet was an office in early century Christianity, it is highly probable that women also held the office of apostle. The debate surrounding Junia's apostolic status is not only about whether she is within the circle of apostles, but whether apostle means apostle. Paul does not restrict the term apostle to the 12. Paul's understanding of apostleship includes both the authorized messengers sent by Christ and those authorized and sent by the churches. Was Junia an apostle authorized and sent by the church, or was she an apostle authorized and sent by Christ? Some scholars regarded Junia as an apostle commissioned by a church for a specific task. However, I believe that these scholars and commentators who so regard Junia have not done justice to her. Paul mentions that Andronicus and Junia were in prison with him, suggesting that he is commending them for having suffered hardships for the sake of the gospel in a similar way that he did as an apostle. Paul also mentions that Junia was in Christ before him, suggesting that she may have been among the earliest converts. This would add to the plausibility of the idea that Luke's Joanna and the Pauline Junia may be the same person. If that is the case, she would have been among the witnesses to the resurrection and commissioned by Christ. Richard Barkham asserts it is quite mistaken to think that the women are here assigned within the community of Jesus' disciples the kind of gender-specific roles that women played in the ordinary family situation. They were equal to the 12 in their duties as disciples. Paul greets Andronicus and Junia as apostles to the Church of Rome, a church that he was not responsible for planting. The assumption can be made that Andronicus and Junia, as apostles, were instrumental in the formation of the church in Rome. If Paul was ascribed church planting to Junia, then he was placing Junia on the same level as his apostleship. This idea deconstructs the contemporary views that women in the early church were not allowed to hold office. This has serious social and theological implications for the ongoing debate about women's role in the leadership of the church and their qualification for ordination. There is sufficient evidence within the primary sources to believe that Junia was an apostle, which would not be unusual since women were often leaders in the early church. It is only subsequently that males gained a monopoly on church offices. Patricia Cox Miller suggests that it was when the church moved toward institutionalization during the 2nd century that it adopted the male-dominated order of Greco-Roman society, where women were defined by their roles as wife and mothers, and public authority and office were assigned to the sphere of men. In many contemporary churches, the concern for women in full leadership roles is juxtaposed against the fulfillment of their socially expected roles of women. Perhaps the women's place was not in the home in first century Judaism or the Greco-Roman world, as some modern thinkers believe. As we consider the women's roles in the contemporary church, it is of significance that we reconstruct the women leaders in the first century church. This requires the use of historical reimagination. Romans 16:7 is a useful place to start this reconstruction because the Apostle Junior has faced much erasure because of her gender. Conventional gender prejudice may be at the root of the debate as to whether Junior is prominent among the apostles or well known to the apostles. The persistent belief that Paul had a low view of women is a matter that the Caribbean church may need to intentionally address. That too may need deconstruction. Modern readers and interpreters who take a patriarchal approach to women's role and contribution in the early church and perpetuate gendered views on the ecclesiastical decisions that inform women's leadership in the contemporary church may need to engage in a rereading of Paul through unbiased lens. Finally, the inclusivist reconstruction of Junior, a woman apostle in the early church with full apostolic authority like Paul, is paradigmatic for women in the contemporary church. Thank you.